evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you all to the book discussion in the series IHC Conversations with Authors, presented by the Habitat Library and Resource Center. On behalf of the India Habitat Center, we extend a very warm welcome to the author for this evening, Ambassador Sujan R. Chinoy. We welcome Dr. Ram Madhav, President of India Foundation, who will be in conversation with Ambassador Chinoy, and we welcome the President of India Habitat Center, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Thank you so much, Madam, for taking time out of your busy schedule to chair this session. Ambassador Sujan R. Chinoy is the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses, New Delhi. A career diplomat from 1981 to 2018, he was the ambassador to Japan and Mexico and the Consul General of India in Shanghai and Sydney. A specialist on China, East Asia, and politico-security military issues, he headed the Indian side in the expert group of diplomatic and military officials, negotiating the confidence-building measures, dialogue with China on the boundary dispute from 1996 to 2000. At the National Security Council Secretariat from 2008 to 2012, he handled external and internal security policy issues. He speaks fluent Mandarin and is conversant in Japanese, German, French, and Spanish. He is the author of World Upside Down, India Recalibrates Its Geopolitics, and Global Tumult, India as a Pole Star, the book that is being discussed today. He has also edited half a dozen books on defense, security, and interrelation topics. Dr. Ram Madhav is an Indian politician, social leader, author, and thinker. Dr. Madhav is the president of India Foundation, a New Delhi-based think tank. In over a decade of India Foundation's existence, Dr. Madhav has been the curator of major annual global and national multilateral initiatives like the Indian Ocean Conference, the Dharma Dhamma Conference, ASEAN India Youth Summit, and Counter-Terrorism Conference, involving heads of nations and leaders of governments, besides academics, scholars, and public-spirited individuals. Most recently, he has been instrumental in ideating the Religion 20 Forum as a part of the G20. Previously, Dr. Madhav has served as the National General Secretary of the Bharatiya Janata Party during 2014 to 2020, responsible for handling the political affairs of Jammu and Kashmir, Assam, and other northeastern states of India. A renowned author and thinker, Dr. Madhav has authored several books in English and Telugu that include The Indian Reality, Partition Freedom, The Hindutva Paradigm, Integral Humanism, and the Quest for a Non-Western Worldview. Because India Comes First, Reflections on the Nationalism, Identity and Culture, and Uneasy Neighbors, India and China after 50 years of the war. He is a regular contributor to newspapers and magazines and has been the editor of Bharatiya Pragya, a monthly magazine in English published by Pragya Bharati, and associate editor of Jagriti, a Telugu weekly. The session will be chaired by our President of India Habitat Center, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee is a seasoned Indian diplomat with a distinguished career in India's foreign service. She has served as India's permanent representative to UNESCO in Paris, Ambassador of India to the Netherlands, and held numerous senior diplomatic positions. Ambassador Mukherjee is known for her expertise in multilateral diplomacy, global governance, and cultural heritage preservation. In addition to her diplomatic work, she has authored many insightful best-selling books on the EU, Bengal's partition, and the root of India's forgotten children, the indentured. May I now invite the author, Ambassador Chinoy, Dr. Madhav, and President IHC, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, to please come to the dais and request Madam for her opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bhavna. I suggest the next time you introduce Dr. Ram Madhav, you also say that we are very proud to have him on the editorial board of Parivartan, where every article that he has contributed so far has really added substance and flavor to Parivartan, all three issues which have come out. It's a pleasure to be here today with Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, who's a close friend. along with Ram Madhavji, of whose works I am a great admirer, and consider myself to be a member of India Foundation. This book, which Ambassador Chinoy has written, Global Tumult, India as a Pole Star, is a timely reminder that the global order is in turmoil and how India represents a beacon of hope in an ocean of despair. There have been so many events since its publication, including the impeachment of South Korea's president at the second attempt, and the overthrow of Bashar Assad in a lightning coup, not to speak about the developments in our neighborhood, the attacks on minorities which continue unabated in Bangladesh, and the kind of hostility emanating from the interim regime and its leader, which is forcing us to shift our focus back to the Indo-Bangladesh border, a border that we had actually thought was one that was finally settled and done. In the meantime, the conflict in Ukraine continues, and we await the inauguration of President Trump on 20th January 25, in the hope that some of the great games and intrigues of the US deep state, including in our neighborhood, will then die down. That's a hope. We have to see what happens. Ambassador Chinoy is, as they said, is fluent, is very, very fluent in Mandarin, and he's a China expert to begin with, and remains a China expert. He has explained the manner in which a hegemonistic and militaristic China is actually a threat to international peace and security on one hand, and definitely to India on the other. China is continuously trying to destabilize our neighborhood to keep India trapped as a sub-regional power. We had a very heartening visit and a conversation today with the Sri Lankan foreign minister that was again organized by Ram Madhavji and India Foundation. And some of the public remarks made by the Sri Lankan president and the foreign minister actually give us much comfort, because to be in such a difficult neighborhood and then to be faced with the kind of developments that we have faced since Sheikh Hasina was overthrown in a orchestrated coup, in my perspective, has actually made our neighborhood a really difficult one for India to confront. As a history student, as a student of history, and as a specialist actually on European Union, apart from Middle East and modern India, I have realized that history has shown that there are 4 ways to respond to militant territorial revisionism, including appeasement, neutrality, capitulation, and confrontation. To continue, as I said, the events leading up to World War II demonstrated that appeasement can delay a war, but it cannot prevent a war. And would you switch off your mobile phone too, please? Thank you. And history of that period reminds us that the cowardly and time-serving appeasement of Hitler with the Munich Pact made World War II in a way inevitable, only delayed it by a few months actually. Similarly, if you go down memory lane, you would see that unless you remember your history, history can repeat itself. China's ambitions to become the only superpower, unless it's checked in time, can lead to another great war with the possible use of nuclear weapons. Where does that bring India as a pole star, according to Ambassador Chinoy? Well, India's time has certainly come. And what are India's options? India has not referred to the One China policy since 2006. India, despite an asymmetrical balance in favor of China with regard to the size of China's nuclear arsenal, has effectively stood up to China in the LAC. No other option is possible or probable. Appeasement is not an option for a hostile neighborhood busy salami slicing India's territory. Confrontation appears inevitable to stop a revisionist power on the march. Alliances are necessary to ensure that India is not alone and can stare down China. Another great war looms uneasily on our horizon. The G20 presidency, so ably chaired by India, demonstrates that India can play a much bigger role on the global stage than it presently does, given the opportunity. And that the civilizational ethos of Vasudeva Kutumbakam is one that we have to persist with, although many forget that Vasudeva Kutumbakam actually says that the world is one family for those who are generous-hearted, because most people don't know the complete 4 lines of Vasudeva Kutumbakam. So we are generous-hearted, so Vasudeva Kutumbakam suits us. In India's neighborhood, there is one country, certainly, that is not generous-hearted. So I don't think Vasudeva Kutumbakam suits them at all. Let me quickly conclude by saying that history is replete with examples of exceptionalism practiced by the West. The West failed miserably in its assessments of both China and Russia, and failed to understand where their core national interests lay. We are constantly reminded that we should respect the rule-based international order. But history, as it has been often said, is written by the victors. In this particular case, most of the modern history of colonies have been written by Western historians with a distinct colonial bias. We are only now coming to terms with it and beginning to rewrite our own historical narratives. India as a pole star reminds us that India too must strive to rewrite these rules through a carefully crafted policy of strategic alliances and partnerships, whereas China, a once colonized nation, is seeking to rewrite the rules to suit its core national interests through hegemony, militarism, and bullying. That is not the game that India likes to play. India's emergence is a given. India is not a hegemonic power, but she will seek great power status, denied to her through 180 years of colonial rule, through her own ethos of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which is an ideology for the generous-hearted. Let me conclude by reminding all of you what Swami Vivekananda once said. He said, India for thousands of years peacefully existed. We, of all nations in the world, have never been a conquering race. And that blessing is on our head, and therefore we live. I would add to that. Therefore we live, therefore we exist, and therefore we will fight, if required, a just war to ensure that the rules of the game are finally rewritten in India's favor. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the discussion. I would now request our author, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, to enter into a discussion with Ram Madhav ji. I don't know how you both have worked it out, but usually maybe you might like to say a couple of lines about your book, and then Ram Madhav ji could ask you questions, but I wouldn't dare to dictate to you how you want to conduct your conversation. So I'll leave it to both of you, and you can talk from the table. And I have moved to one side of the table so that I don't become a, what is it called? Kebab mein haddi.
So, good evening. Let me begin by firstly thanking President of the India Habitat Centre, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, for agreeing to host this at the Habitat Centre and for agreeing to chair this event. And my profound thanks to Shri Dr. Ram Madhav ji for sparing his valuable time and gracing this occasion, agreeing to be in conversation with me. And your presence here, Ram Madhav ji, adds a great deal of value to what is being discussed, the whole idea of India's emergence as a pole star. I know you've been speaking and writing about it for many, many years. Let me briefly begin by saying why the book. You see, essentially, I realized after spending some years as the Director General of India's foremost think tank, the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses, that it provided me a vantage point to be in a space which was not exactly track 1 and not exactly track 2. And from that perch, I had the liberty and the amplitude to explore themes and reflect on them in a much more deliberate manner. And during the G20 presidency of India, I once again was privileged to be the Think 20 chair for India's G20 presidency, and that again gave me a broad sweep overview of what is at stake today in an uncertain world, a world in flux, a world in which we often speak of great uncertainty. But the primary purpose was to put together my own thoughts about India's rise, India's inevitable rise, and the kind of space that India will have to find for itself in a world in which the global order, in fact, has been greatly eroded. The one that we know since 1945 clearly has no place for a rising power like India, especially when it comes to reforms of the UN Security Council. And I also was intrigued by the idea of India's civilization, its ethos, and especially ideas like Vedanta. And how could I relate my own construct to Vedanta philosophy? And one thing that struck me is that just as in Vedanta you have the Brahman and the Atman, there being one sort of primordial premier force known as Brahman, and then you have the Atman, as in all the human beings and forms of existence, etc., relating to that supreme force. Similarly, in the global community today, we as countries, as nations, can also relate to each other as Atman does to Brahman, coming together at some point to deliver on global goods. Now, by the way, I must also take credit for the book cover, because I've unusually, though it is for authors to do it, I've designed it myself. And so I extracted a confession out of Rupa. On the rear of the book, they had to write that the cover page designed by me and not their designer. I'd done it likewise for the previous book, and that allowed me to be more possessive about my book and to relate to it personally. This drift today that we see at the global level, where multilateral structures have been greatly eroded, and we haven't quite reached what you call fulsome multipolarity. So there is a drift taking place today. But some of the more important concepts here that need to be touched upon briefly are strategic autonomy. For me, strategic autonomy is the ability of countries to exercise their own sovereign choices. And it's an instrument for engagement, unlike the non-aligned movement, for example, which to me, in hindsight, appears to be a movement for disengagement. So strategic autonomy today permits big states and small states alike to exercise their sovereign choices and to realize their own destinies. The other important concept here is that great powers are becoming increasingly hard to identify. In 1945, it is four victors who chose a fifth actor called the Republic of China, four Anglo-Saxon or European powers that picked one representative country from Asia, the Republic of China, large, populous, agrarian, and created a privileged class in the United Nations called the UN Security Council. And the membership criterion was not defined. In other words, it wasn't nuclear weapons, because only the US possessed nuclear weapons. Everybody else acquired it later on. It certainly today is not GDP, because today if you look at the UN Security Council and go by GDP, then the list really of permanent membership should be the United States of America, then we will have a country like China, we will have Germany, Japan, and India. If it is to be per capita income, then the list would be entirely different of the permanent category of the Security Council, and it should possibly be the United States of America, Luxembourg, Ireland, Qatar, UAE, and the like. So what exactly makes for a great power today? Is it being a member of the eroded United Nations permanent membership of the Security Council? And I told myself that's not really as important as India exercising its strategic autonomy and digging deep into its civilizational identity and looking to the future in a very constructive way and playing a much bigger role in frameworks that are available to us, alternatives, ranging from the G20 to the SCO to the BRICS, or simply going out alone out there offering pro bono what we can by way of lines of credit, being a net security provider or first responder to our neighborhoods being now increasingly extended for everyone and overlapping. And so that is another definitional aspect that intrigued me when I was looking at India's rise. The other is middle powers. How do you define middle powers? Is India a middle power? And I always thought that India is actually much more than a middle power, with or without a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. Middle powers, there is no grouping that connects them. The MICTA, or so-called grouping of middle powers like Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, etc., they are not a structured organization. They have no secretariat, and they don't really deliver on anything. So there are limitations to using the term middle powers as a construct for India to realize its destiny. The next point that I want to probe here and receive the comments of Ram Madhavji and Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee and yourselves is, how do you define the global south? Is India supposed to realize its destiny as just one among many members of the global south? I would say no. So these are some initial thoughts. China's rise being a great disruptor. It was never a neighbor of India until 1950. It was in a broad civilizational sense, but never a geographical sense. And I have many other points, but I'll stop here because I have broadly introduced some of the impulses that directed my effort. And hand over to Ram Madhavji, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Chinoy, and ma'am, thank you so much for organizing this discussion today. Friends, these days, a lot of literature is coming out on India's foreign policy. Definitely, Ambassador Chinoy's book is also a very significant addition to the discourse and debate going on about the contours of our foreign policy. So the very fact that so many Indian authors, but also non-Indian authors, are today focusing on India, its foreign policy, is in itself a testimony to the rising stature of our country. Today, India is seen as an important power. How do we describe it is a question, whether we call ourselves a regional power, or a global power, or a middle power. But irrespective of how we call ourselves, the world looks up at India as an important power which needs to be taken seriously. That's why, you don't come across any international magazine that deals with foreign policy issues these days without at least one article talking about India. I'm a regular reader of some of those magazines. I used to find months on no mention of India. So much so that we used to feel so belittled that do we exist in this whole scheme of things, global scheme of things. But today that is no longer the case. So in that sense, this title of this book, if you had this title come out 10 years ago, 5-7 years ago, it would have sounded very romantic. To call India the pole star. I'm sure we know what pole star means, Polaris means. The brightest star on the northern skies, which always appears to be very stable in a very unstable, unstable skies, northern skies, although nothing is stable because we are moving, Earth is moving. So, but this pole star has that character, that's why seen as the anchor around which that northern hemisphere is rotating. You are considering yourself the anchor for the entire northern hemisphere to rotate around you. You apply it to India, one would say you are living in a fool's paradise. Are you that great? That is no longer the case. Today, what Ambassador Chinoy tried to suggest in this book through a number of different articles. Good thing about this book is, again, that it's not a long read for you. It is divided into a number of chapters under important subheadings. 4 or 5 chapters grouped into one subheading, like G20. He talked about rise of China. So that makes this book, from the point of view of readability, very easy read. But also it is in a way very close to the current reality of the world, where I would still hesitate to call it a pollster. Maybe that's my own assessment. I don't challenge the assessment of Ambassador Chinoy, but probably that is the ambition to which we have to probably grow, to become a pollster in the global geopolitics. So, since it is supposed to be a kind of a conversation with Ambassador Chinoy, it's not fair on my part to talk more about this book myself. But instead, we would probably hear more about it from the author himself. I agree with one of the main observations in this book, that the global order is changing. A new world order is taking shape, or at least, again, it's also a premature statement. I think Ambassador Chinoy would probably throw some light on it. To say that new order is taking shape, which of course you didn't say that in this, but at least to say that the old order that was built after the Second World War has come to its tether's end today. While new order is still yet to take shape, we are in the transitional period. So in such a transitional period, since you have written about it in this book, what role do you foresee for India to play?
Thank you, Ram Madhavji. In fact, there was a bit of a dilemma when I was thinking of a title. I went over this whole question of whether India is already to be deemed a pole star. And in fact, eventually, after much thought, I decided that a little bit of sleight of hand, legerdemain, with the definite and indefinite article might help me resolve this conclusively. So in fact, my next book is going to be India as the pole star. And because of all that you said, and the fact that it's a journey and we are still performing that journey on our way to true realization of our potential, I decided to go in for an indefinite article and not a definite article. So that is one aspect. The second thing is that effectively speaking, global orders are neither constructed nor dismantled easily. So it is sometimes easy to speak of a new global order. The current one is not responding. 79 years into its existence, it is utterly incapable of responding to the changes in the global environment and especially in the balance of power. Now, how do you construct a global order? The one that has been bequeathed to us 79 years ago is, in fact, and the one that will celebrate 8 decades next year, was the result of a cataclysmic war that came quick on the heels of an equally destructive First World War. In between, there were lame attempts, half-hearted, made to create some kind of a framework and enduring architecture for peace and security. So we saw, for example, the Treaty of Versailles, which actually did not satisfy everyone and failed in 1919. Very quickly on its heels, you had the League of Nations, a truly good idea. It had no veto power. It was a flatter organization than the one that actually came about in 1945. But the League of Nations was not supported by the biggest power at that time, more in economic terms, less in military, because the US truly emerged as a military power only after going through the experience of the Second World War. It was a failure. And then you ultimately could not keep the peace and you had a war. Now, do we want that war again in order to create a new structure? Privileged powers do not give up their privileges easily. So in my view, it would take war, cataclysmic events, occurrences, whether military or very destructive economic events, unimaginable, that brings down everything, critical infrastructure through cyber wars, etc., if not through kinetic wars, to be able to construct anything afresh. And I say this with conviction because it's only once in 1965 that the United Nations has ever thought of reforming itself in the Security Council, when after 4 years of debate in the ECOSOC, you had the non-permanent category being expanded from 6 to 10, taking the total membership from 11 to 15. There has been no change thereafter at all. And so forget the idea of the permanent members ever agreeing to give up their privileged status or allowing other powers to step in with similar privileges. I cannot subscribe to that. So that leaves us with a different choice, that we should play to our strengths. We should continue to say the right things with regard to reform of the global structure. But meanwhile, we cannot wait for that, the holy grail of a permanent membership to be able to realize their potential. What we should be doing is here and now, in our region, with our extended neighborhood interests, and using our status as the world's fastest growing economy with considerably more resources, our expeditionary capabilities, our delivery models for aid and assistance are improving. Why not utilize that? And also look into our own strategic culture. This is something that is very exciting. Now, for God's sake, why should anybody oppose the new instructions that have been put out, that, Auld Lang Syne, a Scottish hymn, which belongs to the pre-1947 era of military traditions, need not be played in the manner in which it was played everywhere, and that we would have some of our own nationalistic songs being played by the military. And so I am a little disappointed when eminent military men come back and say, no, we yearn for that colonial era architecture and, that pomp and pageantry and power and pelf that the colonials exercised through such structures in India. So this is the way I look at it.
Can I just make one comment on that?
Yes, ma'am, please.
What you said, the 2 points I wanted to say. One is what you just said is because the colonial narrative still persists in our minds. Because to be colonized, to understand that you are a subject nation, you have to be hypnotized into believing that you are subordinate. And therefore, whether it is our attempts to modernize the Indian Navy, which still remains very British, and I have many relatives in the Indian Navy, or what you said about Auld Lang Syne, shows that that colonial narrative has not yet been expelled from our heads and our brains. And until we do that, we cannot call ourselves totally liberated. The other point I wanted to make was, you talked about the Treaty of Versailles. I'm a student of history. So, Henry Kissinger said that the Congress of Vienna brought peace to Europe for almost 100 years. And Treaty of Versailles did not. The reason for that is very simple, that for a successful peace treaty, both sides have to be equally satisfied and equally dissatisfied. So much so that they don't seek to overturn the treaty, because the balance of satisfaction and dissatisfaction are more or less equal. Whereas in the Treaty of Versailles, as the British Prime Minister of the time said, Germany must be squeezed like an orange till her pips squeak. It was a vindictive peace imposed upon Germany, which it was not possible for the Germans to swallow. And therefore, the horrors of the Weimar Republic and the rise of Hitler was inevitable, because it was not a treaty that the country that was defeated could ever accept. There was no balance. Whereas in Congress of Vienna, you had Metternich and you had the defeated party who was allowed a certain balance of self-respect, and so Europe did not have war for 100 years. I just wanted to add that to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ambassador, thank you. You see, you talked about the previous world order, and it was created out of that great war called the Second World War. But it had certain contours which seem to be collapsing today. Like, for example, that international liberal order or liberal international order, whichever way you want to call it, which was created post Second World War, had certain features like the Western domination was writ on it prominently. Secondly, it was a bipolar world at that time. Thirdly, the West's domination was driven by its domination in trade, commerce, broadly speaking in the economy, economic domination. But today, in the 21st century, you see all these things are probably, you also rightly mentioned about United Nations, that multilateralism as one of the great aspects of that world order, all of them seem to be collapsing today. You no longer see the dominant West anymore. It's no longer bipolar. It became unipolar for some time. It is now multipolar. You also mentioned about it. You wrote about it in your book. Multipolarity is the order today. Global power axis has moved away from Pacific Atlantic to today Indo-Pacific. It's in our neighborhood that whole power axis exists. Multilateralism, again, you rightly mentioned that it is no longer working. Nobody cares for what UN says today. So we are seeing the collapse of that world order. We are seeing a kind of a disarray today. But you said that India is rising as a pole star. So what kind of new world order do you think that India should probably play as a pole star and guide the world into?
So it's true that it's a much flatter world in some ways. In other words, given the inability of the major powers in that privileged structure called the UN, Security Council, to address any issues in any, effective manner, it has given rise to a lot of scope for countries to not only exercise their strategic autonomy, but to engage in multi-alignment or issue-based alignment, leading to a situation where no single country today, not even the United States, since it's no longer a unipolar world, is able to exercise its writ on all issues in all geographies at all times. And we have seen that resulting also in protracted wars when unequal adversaries are engaged in contestation. Even there, these protracted wars are a result of that ability to equalize and bridge absolute gaps in power through asymmetrical means, whether between Hamas and Israel or whether between Ukraine and Russia, we see that. The other point for me broadly is that you're very right in saying that the traditional engines of global economic growth and power associated with economic power initially, before it translates into militarized power and coercive power, that has shifted considerably away from Europe and North America towards Asia. And initially it was in a niche geography like East Asia or parts of Southeast Asia. And today, under the more dynamic, more inclusive, more democratic, and more representative concept called the Indo-Pacific, this shift in the balance of power is also moving towards India, encompassing India, enveloping India, and moving further afar towards certain dynamic parts of Africa. So I think it is in this extended neighborhood of the Indo-Pacific that India should try to place itself first, rather than trying to, spread ourselves too thin. And I think while engaging, for example, Latin America and other distant parts of the world, we should have a graded mandala system in which we exercise our power, not domination, because domination to me sounds like the Rajsik idea of kingship, which I think India is ill-suited today to be Rajsik. It's not going to achieve our ends. India is also, unlike China, it's not a Tamasic power. It is not out there for itself. And India, therefore, should be using its Sattvic approach, its pro bono approach. And this is what our civilization also teaches us, that we avoid the Rajsik part, though in Chanakya's Arthashastra we know that the mandala system teaches you to dominate your neighbors and things like that. But I think this journey is a crucial one, and we've got to perform it by 2047 and emerge as a truly important beacon. So not Rajsik, not Tamsik, but a Sattvic approach, which is what we are trying to do under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That's precisely what we are trying to do. And so I see ourselves fulfilling our destiny primarily through the mandala system in our immediate Indo-Pacific region. That includes for me Africa. And we have to spread our influence to other parts of the world, which is also being done. I mean, after all, this is a period, the last 10 years, in which visits have been taken to dozens of countries after a gap of 30, 40 years. So in our strategic autonomy, which means engagement, we are also engaging the whole world.
I'm glad that you mentioned about Indo-Pacific. You have written extensively about it in your book also. But what intrigued me was something that I thought I should ask you. Of course, you wrote about the rise of China. From a point of concern, you wrote about it. But you gave a full section to AUKUS, Australia, US, UK. You dealt very little about Quad in this book. Where you dealt with Quad, you suggested that it should be Quad Plus. So on one hand, you talked about rise of China as a concern, and on the other hand, you talked about AUKUS as a very important initiative in Indo-Pacific. Quad, you wanted to include countries like France and UK also. Are you then driving us towards another Cold War?
I don't think so, because for me, Quad is extremely important. I personally believe that the core of the Quad must remain security. Its exoskeleton must have enough plug-in points for others to participate. That is to say, in a Quad Plus format. But the four key partners must keep security dimensions in mind as they go along, even though it's not a militarized grouping right now. Whether it flips over one day into something more military by way of either an alliance or a treaty-based alliance or a naval partnership acting as a treaty partnership will depend entirely on our northern neighbors' behavior. That decision is going to be taken in Beijing. And I wrote extensively about AUKUS also to point out that AUKUS is distinctly a defense partnership. It's a treaty-based arrangement between the three of them. And India doesn't quite fit into that, because there are lots of people in India who say, okay, we've done Quad is very good, now let's also be part of AUKUS. Well, that's not going to be possible, because India is not a camp follower. We certainly shouldn't allow our strategic issues to be analyzed, dissected, and guided in other capitals. And that applies to dealing with any of our neighbors, including China. So I drew that distinction there. But forgive me if I add one more line here by saying that I actually wrote much more about the Quad in my previous book. Okay. So this time I made up with that contradiction.
We have a lot of eager students, professionals and colleagues in the audience who would also like to ask some questions. So Ram Madhavji, do you have any final question to ask?
No, we can
comment.
I would like to remind Ambassador Chinoy that when he talks about treading the middle part of peace while acknowledging Chanakya, I'd like to invite him to remember what Krishna told Arjun when Arjun was unwilling to fight. And Krishna said, those soldiers who are facing you, who are your relatives, by the end of sunset, they will be dead. It is written, so written. And therefore, you have to go and fight. And in the Mahabharata, it is written that when you prepare for war with peace in your soul, there is no sin in that war. Because that war is inevitable, you need to fight the war in order to maintain the peace. So that is what I would add to your
your
philosophy, which perhaps is your philosophy and doesn't quite fit in with my Bengali approach on how we should
But the
defend
point
ourselves.
I've emphasized there, what Ambassador
But
Bhaswati
I'll just give
Mukherjee
the
said
floor
is
back
very
to Ram
important,
Madhav
and
ji.
Ram Madhavji can comment on this. But even that great apostle of peace, Mahatma Gandhi, had said that if he had to choose between violence and cowardly flight, he would choose violence. So India, while talking about peace, non-violence, about resolution of disputes through peaceful negotiations, must never forget that it has a task at hand, which is to keep its powder dry at all times.
I'll request Ram Madhav ji for a final question and then we'll open up to the audience.
Maybe I just want to just add only one thing here, that as I said, this is a very important edition in our foreign policy discourse today. This book, I would like to congratulate Ambassador Chinoy for bringing it out. I mean, India's foreign policy has been suffering from the beginning, right from 1940s onwards, has been a very romantic approach to our foreign policy. What is needed is a very realistic, very realistic, very pragmatic way of assessing it, because politics is about, diplomacy is all about reality, all about opportunities. So on that basis, of course, there has been so much has been written. For example, technology. You wrote so much about technology. These things are very important. India, for it to really become a pole star, it has to have a very strong economy. It has to have a very stable polity. It has to really go miles in its technological capability. It has to rise as a strong naval power. I mean, today, future is about oceans, big oceans. Now, if you want to play a role in Indo-Pacific also, you have to be a blue water power. So, India has to really do a lot of internal hard work in order for it to be able to play an important role in the shaping of the new world order, as to rise as a pollster. And this book actually throws light on many such aspects where India has an advantage, has a lead ahead. So India has to probably work on those aspects very well. And with that comment, I probably leave it open to the participants, to audience, to ask some questions or make some comments.
We have about 8 minutes before we wrap up. So we'll take all the questions together, 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And then I will request Ambassador Chinoy and Ram Madhav ji also. Can you give the mic to him, and can you identify yourself when you get the mic, please? Just take the mic, please.
I'm Dinesh Sharma. I'm a freelance journalist. Brzezinski once said that Soviet Union is 20% communist and 80% Russian. In the case of China, I think it is 90% Chinese and hardly less than 10% communist. It has this Middle Kingdom syndrome, the central point of its thinking.
What is your question, please?
My question is, with this Middle Kingdom syndrome, can India think of getting a middle ground between China and India?
Okay, thank you. I would advise you to read Chanakya also. The mic, please pass it here. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Yuri Banerjee. I'm from MP IDSA. My question to Sir is that India as a pole star in Indian foreign policy discourse, where do we posit ourselves, as Vishwaguru or Vishwamitra? Thank you.
As Vishwaguru or Vishwamitra?
Yes.
It's not possible to be both? No?
So,
Next question, please, over there. Please identify yourself.
Yeah, thank you for considering my question. My name is Shresh Sharma. I'm a research intern at Centre of Geoeconomics for the Global South. My question is open to all three of you. In the future, as you have said, India as a pole star, what do you think will be a unique element which will identify India's global leadership policies?
Next question, please. Anyone else has a question? If not, we will take the answers and wrap up. Please identify yourself.
I'm Rajat Kapoor. I'm a practicing advocate.
Right.
So my question is that the book has a good India being a pole star, but I think why does it have to be saying that India was a sheep earlier and now it's a lion? Just a question.
Why was India a sheep earlier and now a lion?
Yes, as the sir said
Not
that
in the book.
earlier.
I've not said that.
No,
I think
indirect.
you might like to reword your.
Okay.
What we said was India was under colonial rule, and under colonial rule we were structured to think that we were an inferior race, and it's taken time for
No, we were
us to
never.
keep that concept
We were
out of
never
our
inferior.
system.
Who said that?
Those
colonials.
who colonized us tried
said.
to make us feel we were inferior, though we were far superior.
No, who here?
So we are not
who
getting
here
into
feels
dialogue
that
on this.
this is a-
I'll ask the author to
Sir,
respond.
ma'am, the
Any
point
last
is-
question, please? Okay. Ambassador Chinoy, would you like to respond?
Yeah,
The
I have
last one I can
a
respond.
couple of quick points.
Last question. Yeah, please. Give him a mic. Please identify yourself, sir. Mic le lijiye. Yeah.
I am HS Sani, retired from a PSU. My question is that in India, democracy is very universal, and it is causing more, is not it a curse? Democracy should be limited democracy. Is not it?
Thank you for your question. We are running out of time, so I'll ask Ambassador Chinoy to answer the questions. And
Yes,
request
I'll be
Ram
brief and
Madhavji
to the
also.
point, and then Ram Madhavji can also chip in.
Yeah, please.
Firstly, middle ground, what kind of middle ground can we have with China when it has a middle kingdom syndrome? Look, China is going to do what it can to expand its influence, to promote its economic power, and now gradually being militarized as well. So it is inevitable that when a country rises in such a telescopic manner over 40 years, that it will spill over into other peripheries where it hitherto was absent. One such region is South Asia. Now you have a choice here of going toe to toe with an economy that's more than 5 times India's size, or you have a choice of doing better what you can in your part of the world. So my idea is that China will do what it must. Let us do what we have to. The second part is Vishwa Guru or Vishwa Mitra. Look, nobody wants leaders today. Everybody wants a flatter world. Even in the global south, nobody wants a leader. So I would strongly recommend that we, as we are doing already, promote ourselves genuinely as a Vishwa Bandhu, as a Vishwa Mitra, and not as a Vishwa Guru. As Vishwa Guru, you run the risk of eventually being targeted by not necessarily countries of the global south, but other vested interests who are competing for a similar space. Unique element of India's global leadership is the human-centric approach to development proposed by the Prime Minister of India. And as for the last question, whether there should be less democracy in India, this is beyond my pay band. I think Ram Madhavji will comment on that. I think there should be. It's not in my book in any case, but personally I subscribe to democracy, and India is one of the greatest bastions of democracy. Please don't be convinced by China when it says it represents whole process democracy. That's nonsense, as they did when they were celebrating their centenary of the party. They said it is China that is the beacon of whole process democracy. Far from it. It is India that represents one of the most dynamic economies and democracies in the world.
Ram Madhavji, you can comment on
Nothing
anything
much,
that-
just on a lighter note, this Vishwa Guru thing is a very romantic idea. As I said, we are very romantic people. World has to recognize us as Vishwa Gurus. You cannot proclaim yourself as Vishwa Guru. World has to one day say, "Okay, you are our Guru." But we are very fond of calling ourselves Vishwa Guru. But as Ambassador said, in a flattened world, it's better to be friends with everybody. I must tell you, even today, although it is the second largest economy in the world, China refuses to call itself a developed nation. It still calls itself a developing economy. It still calls a regional power. It doesn't call itself a global power. We all call it as a global power. So something like Vishwa Guru should happen that way. We will be humble, but world will call us Vishwa Guru. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very scintillating conversation. We've asked Rupa to keep some books outside. So if any of you would like Ambassador Chinoy to autograph it, please do go ahead and get the book, and I'll request him to autograph it. Thank you very much. And